Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and a warm welcome. This is one of the first virtual side sessions to the OECD Garment Forum this year, and I welcome you very much to it. My name is Matthias Altmann. I am with the UNECE, where I lead the work on value chain transparency and traceability and have responsibility for supporting the development of the United Nations Transparency Protocol, or UNTP, which will be the topic of our session today. We are excited by the response to this session. We got more than 260 registrations from across global garment and footwear value chains. This level of interest tells us that the challenges around traceability and data exchange are no longer theoretical. They are operational, urgent, and in need of practical solutions. So, across the garment and footwear value chain, we see expectations are rising fast. With regulatory due diligence reporting and eco-design requirements, increasing data demands from brands and buyers, and growing pressure on governments or growing pressure particularly on manufacturers to provide more information more often and more formats. At the same time, we see real frustration. Duplicative data requests, siloed platforms, manual verification processes, and limited ability of manufacturers to control the data that they provide. The United Nations Transparency Protocol was created to respond exactly to this problem by providing a common digital foundation that allows existing systems, standards, and tools to work together. Today's session is about explaining what the UNTP is and what it really means in practice for the sector. And of course, for you, because we also want to invite you to engage in it, in its development and in its upscaling. So let me say just this about the UNTP. The UNTP is not a platform, it's not a reporting tool, it's not something which should replace traceability systems, ERP systems, or certification schemes. And very important, it also does not replace meaningful engagement of brands with their supply chain, with their stakeholders when conducting risk-based due diligence. What the UNTP is, it is a UN-backed digital standard and interoperability protocol designed to make supply chain sustainability data trustworthy, verifiable, and interoperable across systems and industries. To explain what this means for you, that is the purpose of our session today. We have designed it as a structured question and answers discussion, with questions that will be asked from the perspective of garment manufacturers, and those who are at the upstream of the global garment and footwear supply chains. For that perspective, I'm very happy that we are joined today by Annette Soti. She's co-creator at the Fashion Producers Collective and deeply involved in its community of practice on traceability. Annette will pose a set of pre-prepared questions developed directly with manufacturers, reflecting the pain points they experience with current traceability and compliance approaches. She will ask these questions to a wonderful lineup of speakers. We have with us Harley Thomas, Chief Technical Officer at Trust Provenance from Australia and technical expert to the UNTP. He will focus on the design characteristics of the protocol. Then Martha Willis, fashion sector expert and consultant to the UNTP, who will be here for particularly answering questions on the benefits and practical application of the UNTP to textile and garment value chains. Then Blake Harris, Managing Director of the Global Food Traceability Center, with deep experience implementing interoperability frameworks in other sectors like seafood, leather, or beef. And last but not least, Christian Hudson, who works with GIZ and who is our chair of the UNECE team of specialists on ESG traceability. Before we get started with Annette, I would encourage you to make use of the Q&A function of the session actively so that we can also answer your questions at the end of the session when we go into the open question and answers part. With that, I will hand over to Annette.
Thank you, Matthias. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon for the participants. My name is Annette Soti. My background is in fashion textile manufacturing for footwear. I've been working for several years for eChain Group, Taiwan-based footwear textile manufacturer. And recently, I also co-created the Fashion Producer Collective. as Matthias mentioned, we've been running a community of practice on traceability edit with several manufacturers over the past months. The project is administered by the Fashion Producer Collective. Let me introduce you who FPC, the Fashion Producer Collective, is first. FPC is a new producer-led sustainability think tank, transforming business models for a better future. We imagine a world where producers are co-creators of sustainability, not just its implementers. Our mission is to build manufacturers' influence over sustainability in a way that inspires, not compels. And as Matthias mentioned, we've been running a community of practice on traceability. And I would like to share with you, just to set the ground of this session today, what we identified as global main challenges for manufacturers to face the traceability journey to date. So the participating manufacturers shared the current challenges in their journeys. The first global challenge is the regulatory squeeze and compliance overload. The second global challenge is the critical upstream data gap and investment impasse. And the third global challenge is the system fragmentation and the duplication of effort. Actually, we summarized that as a global collective challenge, that grappling with the need to build a single credible due diligence program is necessary while managing a non-standardized supply base under the immediate pressure of the regulatory deadlines. And just to share a little bit more in practice what it means in the daily operation of manufacturers. So the operational challenges after the three main challenges I shared are the complex systems, the manual processes, and the limited visibility. Processes and the limited visibility means in the manufacturer's work. So the complex systems refers to the technical and the structural difficulty of connecting sustainability, production, and sourcing data across a company. The manual processes describes the labor-intensive reality of the data collection, the verification, and the human challenges of maintaining consistency without automatization. And the limited visibility describes the lack of integrated platforms to consolidate fragmented upstream information from Tier 2 to Tier 4 into a coherent, verifiable record. So these are the identified challenges of our community of practice under the Fashion Producer Collective. And based on that, I would like to start to ask our questions for implementation and operationalization to our panelist peers. So, hello, Harley.
Hi.
Hi. So, simply to put, what is the UNTP?
Great, thank you, Annette. Well, first and foremost, and most importantly, the UNTP is a protocol. It is not a platform. We're not trying to achieve anything around building one centralized platform or set of registries. The UNTP is all about giving a protocol and a set of tools for existing platforms, traceability systems, existing registries to support all of the use cases that we're talking about today around transparency up and down a supply chain. And UNTP, it's built on two key ideas that are very important. It's all around, as a stakeholder in the supply chain, can I get access to trustworthy and verifiable data? Can I see the claims? And can I see who has issued those claims about the different products and organizations and facilities I interact with day to day in my place within the supply chain? And if I can get that high quality, verifiable, and trustworthy data, is there a way that we can maximize the efficiency of which it can be shared up and down the supply chain? So really, can we move away from paper records and PDFs perhaps being emailed to one another to something a little bit more streamlined, where I can actually see that data about those products, those facilities and organizations in my supply chain? And the reason why that is important, as we all know, there's increasing demand. Camille, if we could just go to the next slide, on traceability and sustainability data down multiple tiers. in a supply chain as well for voluntary and mandatory requirements going forward. You needed to reach further down in your supply chain to get access to the data that you need to make the claims to whoever the stakeholders are for your organization. And globally, there's been different iterations of solutions of this. The most common one that you'll see is, why don't we just push data to one another? And if we go to the next slide, we'll see that if you do that math quite quickly, you can see if we try to push data to each and every other system that might possibly be in our supply chain, the number of connections required to facilitate that data transfer grows exponentially as well, and is very costly and labor intensive to maintain. And simply, we just haven't seen evidence of that working anywhere at scale. The other solution that people and communities tend to reach for is, why don't we have a single centralized platform? As goods move throughout a value chain, why don't we just put the traceability or the sustainability data that we need on a single platform, maybe a single traceability platform, maybe a blockchain or something like that as well. And once again, yeah, we're still to find a good, compelling example of that working truly at scale to meet all of the needs that are coming at us in the coming years as well. And on the topic of centralization, there's just a good analogy when it comes to banking. It's not the way that our finance systems work. As a quick example, if I travel internationally and I want to make a payment to the hotel that I'm staying at, I don't need to use the same bank as the hotel. Or if I go to my grocery or supermarket, I don't need to use the same banks as my supermarket as well. The financial ecosystem has developed protocols to allow this seamless transaction of financial operations between different actors as well, without building out these complex monolithic platforms as well. So the whole idea of the UNTP is to kind of ask the question, can we do the same thing but for traceability and sustainability data as well? If we head over to the next slide, is there a way that we can make traceability information, claims about products, organizations and facilities discoverable and linked to one another as well? If I'm an actor in a supply chain, can I pull the thread? It's a terminology that we have at the UNTP to discover all of the data that I need for my use cases as well, across the many tens or hundreds of different systems that data might live in across those different stakeholders in that supply chain as well. And that's probably just a brief example of what the UNTP, I guess, a key architectural principle of the UNTP is discovering data up and down the supply chain, moving away from having all of these integrations between all of these different systems to try and push data to one another as well, and move to this concept of, if I have an identifier of the thing, like a QR code in some kind of product, if it's a t-shirt or a bale of cotton, can I get data about that particular product without having to care all too much about what system that data might live in as well? And I won't go into the details now, but on the screen, you can see we've got some key pillars to the UNTP as well. Finding the data, making sure that it's discoverable up and down a supply chain. The data itself, that's that traceability information. That's that digital product passports where I can see the claims about the products I'm interacting with. Digital facility records where I can see claims about the facilities that I'm interacting with as well. And those digital conformity credentials, which is evidence about the claims made against those different products and facilities as well. And developing mechanisms to make sure that I can understand that data once I have it in my system and I need to execute the use case as well. And then making sure it is secure. I only share data with those that I want to in the supply chain and only under circumstances of which it brings me value, and making sure that we have all of these great communities all around the world to make sure that we have great community activation and really demonstrate the use cases of the UNTP to generate value for that data as well. And that's it from me, and I'll move over back to you, Annette. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Harley. Can you just remind us one more time what is exactly the problem that the UNTP is trying to tackle for us? What does change from tomorrow that we have UNTP existing?
Sure, I think we're all experiencing. I'm from Australia. I'm from an Australian agriculture background, and I'm sure it's very similar in textiles as well, that we have an increasing demand of that trusted data to meet voluntary or regulatory requirements going forward. And I think it's quite a sensible assumption to make that the existing systems and practices simply won't scale well enough to meet all of those demands at scale in a cost-effective way that is beneficial and equitable for everyone in the supply chain. And the UNTP has a lot of use cases and benefits to it as well. And that's sometimes why it's a bit hard to articulate the exact one for everyone that might be listening in the call as well. But it's all around having that way where I get that trustworthy, verifiable data about the products, the facilities, and the organizations that I interact with. And I can get that data frictionlessly and easy and at a low cost as well, compared to the existing systems today around PDF documents, paper documents, costly integrations between different systems in a supply chain as well.
And can you explain one more time what protocol means? Because we are not a platform, or UNTP is not a platform, but like what the meaning of protocol is in this kind of work.
Yeah, sure. Maybe a good analogy we all use it day to day is email. Maybe some of us are using Microsoft and Outlook. Maybe we're using Google and Gmail. Maybe we're using Hotmail or something like that as well. Email is a protocol. It's governed independently, and any solution provider like Microsoft or Google or whatnot can implement the protocol. And because we can all implement it, that means that we can send emails to one another. And all of these different servers and systems that are being developed don't need to integrate with one another. We look at a common protocol, it makes sense, we agree on it, we all implement it in our respective platforms. In this case, it's your sustainability or your traceability platforms, other systems that might exist as well. And we all agree on a way that we can share this data, discover this data about us as well, and then also understand that data.
That's a very great example. Thank you so much. I believe this one, and also the banking, how we actually use our transactions between banks, is a very good example to understand the nature of protocol in this work.
Perfect. Thank you.
Then we can move to Marta. Good morning, Marta.
Good morning. Hi, Annette.
Marta, what would change practically mean for manufacturers when the UNTP is deployed successfully for the textile sector?
Great.
If you can speak to that for us.
Yes, of course. So one of the reasons why I've been invited to speak in this session today is because throughout 2025, I was working on behalf of UNECE with industry stakeholders to really identify use cases for improved data in value chains that would lead to increased value to all stakeholders. So I'd really like to answer the question that you have for me using two problem statements, which we identified in that piece of work are real pain points for the textile industry. My job here today is to really bring the business perspective. So I'm going to try and do this in a really simple way. It might frustrate some of the more technical people on the call, but we're really hoping this helps with the understanding. So the first problem statement is that manufacturing sites and corporates have have IDs with multiple third parties, which are each holding different data and duplicating input requests. So on the next slide, we can see this visually represented. So you can understand that in the status quo of the industry at the minute, we have a factory or supplier on the left. They know all of the information about their site, and they're being requested this information from multiple platforms, from brands, from auditors, and from standards. They have to enter this multiple times. This is a lot of time that is taken. There's also then differences in how the data is entered, meaning that it's almost impossible to try and match data sets from different platforms. And this translates then into an issue for the brands or some of the standard bodies. So essentially, where we are at the minute is time intensive and it leads to mistakes. As you heard from Harley at the beginning, it also means that we're having to create a lot of different individual connections between different platforms so that they could be able to transfer the data between each other. And that also comes to be very costly and time intensive. So with this really specific problem then, how could the UNTP help us? So you can see on this slide a visual representation of what the UNTP could do. So you saw from Harley, there's different elements of the UNTP, and one of them is a digital facility record. So in the UNTP version of the world, facilities would create and publish a digital facility record, which houses all of the data about their site or corporate, including relevant IDs, location, processes, and contacts. This information will be published under an ID, and this would be on an existing platform or an ID scheme. So think of the main ones in the industry at the minute. It might be GS1, it might be Open Supply Hub or Textile Exchange. So rather than entering that information multiple times, the information is created in one place and made available through an information exchange protocol, the UNTP. So it can be discovered then by anybody that needs to find it, whether that's a certifying body that's conducting an audit, authorities that require information, or brands that want to onboard a new supplier. So the UNTP isn't a platform in this case, but it facilitates the exchange of data through those actors, removing this duplication in entering data and the duplication of requests. It means we have a single source of truth. So this is only a very simple example. But the digital facility record could have more than this in it. It could also have information about environment, social, or sustainability performance. But this is it in its most basic form. So if we go to the next slide, the second problem statement we had as part of engaging with stakeholders over the past year was concerns around the upcoming need to publish digital product passports. We know that with upcoming regulation, this is going to streamline the amount of data that's requested, but we're also going to need better quality of data about products at a bigger scale. So on the next slide, we'll look at what happens in the status quo. Annette, I think you highlighted at the beginning, there's so many systems that are in this process and all of them are pushing data to each other. So we know that brands are often using two systems to manage their products. That might be an ERP system and also a PLM system, which has product information in it. On top of this, there might be a different platform that manages suppliers or a traceability platform that does that. And maybe in another platform, there's sustainability performance. And you also mentioned this as an issue for suppliers, Annette, that you're also lacking this ability to manage upstream data from your suppliers. So all of this data can be linked in different ways through specific platforms and then needs to be pushed to a digital product passport system. So the way it happens at the minute, this might include manual entry of information by suppliers or setting up a lot of these very individual connections. And this is very time and cost intensive, and this duplication of information can result in errors. So how could the UNTP help us solve this problem? We know that we're going to need digital product passports because we need second-hand sellers that want information, authorities that might want to authenticate eco-modulation, or that might demand the mandatory publication of DPPs, or there might be consumers that want to know more information about the product. So within the UNTP, brands would publish the digital product passport using any platform they wish. Again, it's linked to an ID. And this ID provides access to information, which you can see examples of here. So rather than being pushed the data from many different systems, the UNTP provides this protocol for different systems to publish specific data in the same way so that it can be discovered, no matter how many systems that it comes from. Next slide. And so this was a very simple example, and we don't want to try and overcomplicate it. But also within the digital product passport and the UNTP, it's not just talking about a product, but it also has DPPs for digital product passports or digital product passports for intermediary goods in the supply chain. And each one can be discovered by the next actor, as you can see in the graphic here. Each of these passports would include both traceability and compliance information, and then that ladders up to the main product passport. So in both of these examples, the benefits of this for manufacturers are one-time entry and audit, which could also lead to potential lower costs of compliance and increased market access. All that manufacturers would need to do is use systems that are UNTP compliant and that support linked data. So again, we'll reiterate, the UNTP isn't a system, but it just facilitates the discovery of data in different places. And I'll stop there. Hopefully that was clear.
Thank you, Marta. It's definitely very maybe complex for all of us a little bit at this stage. So let me just try to put it into practice from the manufacturer side. As I mentioned at the beginning of this session, One of our manufacturers' main challenge is the system fragmentation and the duplication of effort, which means internal data alignment and external reporting issues. For internal data alignment, there is an ongoing challenge in aligning internal data and systems across various departments to meet requirements accurately and practically. And for manufacturers' external reporting to their brand customers is that the brand customers each use different traceability platforms, imposing varied and duplicative requirements for documentation and reporting. So my question to you, just to put it very simply, to understand on the operationalization side, how does UNTP solve the problem of duplicative data request?
Yeah, it's a great question, and something that we heard from stakeholders is a big issue. So I think the one thing is that the UNTP is designed to help both brands and suppliers. So it's designed as a protocol that helps that information exchange between different systems. So the systems that you already use as a manufacturer, for example, your ERP system, a PLM system, or traceability system, become the source of truth for the data. And that data is then discoverable by any platform that a brand is using, or that could be a traceability platform or their ERP or PLM system. So essentially, how it flips the scenario is that that brand's platform can discover the data from systems that manufacturers can use in just the same way as if you would have had to enter it into the platform. So what it does is remove this duplication of requests. If you have the data published in one place, that data is then discoverable by whoever needs to access it or whoever you've given permission to access it.
So it sounds to me that the UNTP is like a bridge between manufacturers' ERP or PLM systems and the brand's voted traceability systems. Am I on the right track?
That's exactly right. But it could also be a bridge between systems, between certification bodies and manufacturers. So, for example, if you're having audits and there's a manufacturer, auditor that would like to find information about your facility, they will also be able to go and find it in the same place. So again, you're removing that need to enter information in multiple places.
Okay, I think it's pretty clear at this point. Maybe it's a bit easier than the infographics to digest for the first time. Thank you. Then we can move to our next panelist and speaker peer, Blake. Good morning, Blake.
Good morning.
What can the textile sector learn from efforts at introducing interoperability of traceability in other sectors' supply chains, just like the agriculture or critical minerals, electronic sector?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think let's maybe dive into that interoperability definition just real quick and simply. That essentially means being able to share data between two systems without the need for human intervention, right? That is what we're building towards. And in order to get to that point, you need to have sort of three enabling factors. You need to have consistent data being collected, so by the industry about a product. You need to have a consistent way to format that data and exchange that data between two systems so that those systems, they speak different languages just like we humans do, right? We need to make sure that they're able to understand the data that is being sent across to the new system by defining that data format and the way that that data is exchanged. And that's really what we're working towards here. So thinking about how we can learn from other sectors, the food sector is a really interesting case study because traceability has been incredibly important in the food sector for decades due to food safety risks, right? And so think about taking a supply chain mapping approach when there's some sort of food safety outbreak, how long that must take to really get back to the root cause of the problem. And that's really kind of been the approach in the food system, a one up, one down approach to sharing data about these food products and commodities as they move through the supply chain. And just like what we've been talking about today, the way in which that data is recorded, what data is recorded, how that data is housed, whether it be in a PDF or a handwritten document, it varies from one company to the next, and it makes that really difficult to do quickly. So over the last 10 to 15 years, as there's been greater digitization in these supply chains, there's been a shift in defining what data must be collected and when that data must be collected. So this framework is called an event-based traceability framework. And it's really defining the different activities in a supply chain at a broad level, right? When inputs are transformed into an output, when a product is shipped from one facility to the next, or received, or harvested, and then defining each of the data points that must be collected during each one of those activities. And applied to a system as a whole, this significantly reduces the confusion for implementation. Right now, if I am working in a food system or a textile system, I know what activities that I perform. Am I transforming a product? Am I simply distributing a product? And therefore, I know, because what activities I perform, what data I must also be collecting about that product to maintain traceability throughout the supply chain. So now, as we start to think through digitization and interoperability, we can start to define how that data needs to be formatted in a digital software solution and the ways in which that data is able to be shared, right? And that's what can lead us to interoperability, which again reduces that redundant data entry requirement and the associated licensing fees that you may have. We call this portal fatigue, right? Where a company has 10 different portals that they need to input essentially the same data into to meet either customer or regulatory requirements. And the great thing about this is, there's been a lot of investment, both monetary and time, in, using better digital tools like ERP systems throughout these supply chains. And the request here is not add another system to what you're already doing. It may require some tweaks to the existing systems that you use, but really just building out on those existing systems, maybe the data that they're already collecting. And the important thing around following a standard protocol is that tools and resources can be created because everybody's now doing it the same way. You can create open source tools, public good resources that everyone can use to reduce the time and effort for implementation. So a really specific example in food is in the seafood sector. Seafood is a globally traded commodity. There's a lot of different species, and they're very opaque supply chains with a lot of opportunity to switch, one species for a higher value species, or kind of obfuscate where the country of origin was for a particular product. So in seafood, in 2017, there was an initiative created called the Global Dialogue on Seafood Traceability to do very much what UNTP is setting out to do as well. Create a standard around what data needs to be collected at what points in the supply chain and how can that be shared more easily. Fast forward to today, this was an industry-initiated group, and there are partners from international brands and retailers throughout the supply chain, all the way down to smallholder handline fishing associations, which is important because you get the perspective across the supply chain. Also in the seafood industry, the 4 major sustainability certifications are all investing in ways to leverage this seafood traceability framework to be used in their certifications, which they're very kind of powerful players in that space. And then also from a regulatory perspective, last year we had Indonesia, a major seafood exporting country, aligning with this seafood standard. And there's 10 other countries that are either considering taking the same approach as Indonesia or pointing to the Global Dialogue on Seafood Traceability standard as a best practice, in addition to support from the UN Food and Agricultural Association. So building on these principles, we've also started to do work in the beef and leather sector, where there's been a lot of experience gained in seafood, but it's also around traceability, which is transferable regardless of what sector you're talking about. And so I think this approach is one that has been proven, and has support from all the key stakeholders, right? Industry, regulatory authorities, certifications, nonprofit organizations, academia. And we are working with the UNTP to ensure that we're harmonizing our efforts and engagement to support each other's initiatives, because we are working in very complex supply chains, but this has proven that it can work.
Thank you so much. This all sounds actually very ambitious, and also thank you for the proof of points from the agriculture and the food sector. The textile sector can be very inspired and learn a lot from you. Speaking to that, we would move to our last section, to Christian. And rest assured, we are going to have 15 minutes for Q&A. And also as a reminder, us as a community of practice, we also learning. We don't have all the answers for manufacturers figured out yet for operationalizing. So also myself today, I'm hearing and learning also new information to be able to navigate myself and also our community how to operationalize and implement the traceability challenges. So today for me is also an active learning session, and thank you for all the panelists and our presenters to help building our understanding. Christian, good morning also to you.
Good morning, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody who's listening.
Christian, what are the practical steps for the UNTP's deployment to the textile sector? How to get the industry behind it?
Yeah, both crucial questions going forward. And to recap a couple of things that you and others have said already. You said at the top that there's this problem with duplication because there are different requests coming in. And Blake has just said that to get avoiding duplication, you need to get certain tweaks to the existing systems. So to move forward practically, there are two things which need to happen. The first is, how do we work out what those tweaks to existing systems need to be to get this interoperability between systems? And then the second one is to answer your question, which is, how do we get everybody to make the same request for data? And the answer to both these questions, as has been proven in the seafood sector and in the banking sector and in other places, the answer is to bring people together to get the agreements on both of these issues, to learn together in the way that you're saying, but also to get agreement. So around the UNTP for textiles, we are bringing together working groups of people on early deployment of this interoperable data access. And we're doing this now based on months of discussions with multi-stakeholder groups that took place last year around identifying what bits of data would be most usefully exchanged and where we go back, it's too early, and where we already have some alignment around data requests. And the second thing we're doing is, together with the groups who are already working on alignment across the textile sector, looking to find out where we need greater alignment in requests so that we can have brands asking manufacturers for the same bits of data and doing that in the same format. Next slide, please. So next year, or this year now already, we've got various different working groups of stakeholders coming together. We've got a work program that's going ahead. And the success of this work program is going to depend on participation. So there's a great opportunity for everyone to engage and to learn on the job whilst creating with others. Each of these working groups, as you can see from this cutout of the start of this work program, is going to focus on a particular use case, so a particular set of data which might be really helpful, and tackle a particular problem that has been identified by the stakeholders, have some clear objectives as to what we're going to achieve by tweaking our systems. And we know that we need to have a mix of stakeholders in each of those working groups. We can have more stakeholders, but to get the right discussions going, we know we need a good mix of people who are engaged on those. So this is one area where it's open to everybody who's got skin in the game to engage to get to results which are truly practical and functional. Next slide, please. Based on what we've learned over the last few years, and it's been mentioned by previous speakers, we know that to make progress going forward, we need all the actors who have an influence on good outcomes from due diligence. And so we are already engaging with the policymakers, the brands and retailers, the supply chain, and indeed everybody on this slide. Next slide, please. Over the last 2 years, I, in my role as a chair of the thing called the Team of Specialists, which supports the development of the UNTP, have been building up relationships with those different stakeholder groups. And what we now are doing, along with the working groups, is setting up a network of exchange of information about the progress with the deployment and the alignment on data points with all of these groups. Because what we need, and what we've seen in other areas, is agreement across a critical mass of actors. And what is great news is that now we have that critical mass of actors who are saying, yeah, this is the goal that we want. We've all got common problems around the need to simplify the exchange and accessibility of data for due diligence purposes. We see there's a common need. Let's come together and make it work. Next slide, please. And so we've called that target a stakeholder forum, and basically it's got 2 objectives. The first is the practical global uptake of protocols and practices, i.e. the UNTP, that enables this interoperable data discovery. And then the second one is what you've already asked, the global alignment around data sets. That sounds impossible to do because everybody's got a different piece of data or bit of information that they might want to have or to offer. But what we can do practically is to start out with a small core data set for market scale adoption so that the most commonly asked for pieces of data are aligned, and then build out from that. And next slide, please. And the good news is it's not just us doing this, but we're working by trying to create an umbrella for everybody who's already working on this to get alignment. So, for example, you'll see here that the alignment groups which are going to be going ahead already are being led by other organizations. The first of these alignment groups is reflecting work that's already done by the AAFA, bringing together multiple stakeholders. The second here is the effort by the ILO Better Work to create a foundational data set of information about legal compliance with labor rights. So what we can feasibly do is provide a forum for exchange so that everybody on this call and beyond can find out what others are doing, see where they can buy in and get critical mass. On the early deployment side, we've got different work streams which are going forward, which pretty much like Martha described in those use cases going forward, is picking out one piece of a complex problem and finding a practical solution. For example, around product identifiers or site and corporate identifiers. And as Blake mentioned, beef and leather traceability. Each of those has different challenges. We can't tackle everything at the same time. So let's get together the people who are working on that already and find a common solution that works for everybody. Next slide, please. We've got a structure for how this works together so that there are different ways in which every one of you can engage. We've got some technical working groups at the bottom. So, for example, Harley could be leading the technical expert group where he's got huge amounts of technical expertise. And then we've got those multi-stakeholder groups in blue, some working on alignment, some working on deployment. And then above that, for people who don't have time necessarily to really get into the details in the working groups, a multi-stakeholder community that can look at what all of those groups are doing, comment on that, and find the agreement which is necessary globally to move us to this degree of harmonization. Next slide, please. So how can you personally engage on this call? So you've done it already because you're on the call. You're interested in finding solutions to the problem, and it's our job to provide you a route to engage more deeply so that you can participate in co-creating the right solution, a solution that works for you. To engage practically, choose which of the working groups are most of interest to you, and you can do that by looking at a list of working groups that we can send around describing which problem they're tackling. Contact the working group facilitator, could be one of us, it could be somebody else, and then participate in regular scheduled online meetings to give your perspective. You don't need to know everything about everything, you just need to know what your problem and what solution would work for you. You can also just respond to written consultations on documents which are sent around if the time zones for working meetings are not appropriate. And you can, particularly important, nurture discussion inside your organizations and get networks from your, build networks and get insights from your colleagues. Because as has been pointed out, there are different bits of data held by different colleagues using different systems for different purposes across your organization. And what we need and what we're working on and what the protocol offers is a solution which allows even internally correspondence and alignment across data. So that's it from me. We're really here to serve. And so welcome participation. And do ask any questions in the chat to, even at a really basic level, to get down to, okay, what are we going to do? How do we do this? Thanks.
Thank you very much, Christian. Just one quick question, like how do we all know, either if we are brands or manufacturers or retailers, that our interests are going to fairly shape the outcome of the UNTP? How are you going to work this into the working groups?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because what we have done is listen to that worry and said, okay, we know that a system for sharing data, it's like a chain. And if to simplify, it's like a chain. And if you have a weak link somewhere or a chain breaks, or one link breaks, the whole chain falls down. So we need to build a system which really works for everyone. So it's totally in everybody's interests to get a system in which everybody's voice is represented and the solution does work. And so the way that we work will be based on principles of fair representation and putting a lot of effort into making sure we get the voices of all of the actors in the value chain and that everybody is bought into that principle. Because without it, if there's bias, if there's unfairness, people are not going to engage, people are not going to share data in an open way. And there's lots, as Blake said, there are a lot of examples of how this has been done in other areas. We can learn from that, bring that over, make sure we've got the right governance and the right systems and processes in place.
All clear. So we all know that we can participate and we can join, and then there are going to be plenary forum discussions and also bi-weekly different meetings with different cadence when we actually can input and make sure that our influence is being shaped, our influence is shaping the UNTP today.
Exactly. And I think what you highlighted right at the start is that this is a problem which has to be tackled. This is the way that it's being tackled. So something's going to come out of this. It's on us all to make sure that the right thing comes out of this, and that happens by participation.
Great. I would like to open the floor for our audience. We're expecting the questions in the Q&A box. So please feel free to pose your questions to any of us. Camille?
Annette, you already have a few questions listed. I also encourage all the speakers to perhaps write the answers to the specific questions. But for instance, I don't know if you can see the chat box, but one question is, what is the current status of the UNTP? Is it already being used? So Matthias, perhaps
excellent
you can answer
question.
to that.
I can take it, and you have a moment then, Annette, to skim through the other questions while I answer this one. Great question from Lisa Rustmeier on what is the current status of the UNTP. Is it already used? If not, what is the next steps to move towards implementation? We are actually still in the stage of developing the UNTP. We are heading towards a version 0.7, but aim for a full implementable version by summer this year. That will then be the version that we will also subject to approval by UN member states to really turn the UNTP into a global UN standard that can from then on be used as such and implemented. We have a lineup of implementers or software providers, solution or traceability solution platforms who are interested to run pilots with us on the UNTP. So there is a strong industry interest in taking up the UNTP. And as soon as we have this implementable version, we are going to step by step work with them on testing implementation, but also the pilots and use cases that Christian and Martha mentioned are a way how we are actually moving from development into implementation and testing what has been developed so that it becomes really ready for the market. I may also say that the UNTP is a core protocol. While we develop it, we also develop sector-specific extensions or sector protocols to it, which are then the ones which actually be used in each sector, because every sector is different. A specification for a digital product passport in the meat sector is very different to one in the garment sector. So these differences in supply chains need to be accounted for, and that's what happens in the sector protocols, which are based on the core specifications of the UNTP, but then adapt them to the sector. So you will see actually sector-specific protocols being the actual product that you are going to implement, or what, not you, but mostly the traceability providers will implement, and then you can use interoperable traceability systems that they, and if you choose those which are conform to the UNTP. So that's my answer to this question. Thank you for it.
Then let me choose another question which was not answered in the Q&A box. Blake mentioned a couple of great initiatives. Are the seafood certification systems already using a common protocol, or are they willing to move to a common one? This would imply pre-competitive action and coordination, also implying additional cost, correct?
Yes. So the seafood certifications are moving towards a common traceability protocol around the initiative in seafood that I mentioned called the Global Dialogue on Seafood Traceability, which is a traceability data standard. And this actually would imply not additional costs, or rather reduced costs for many of the seafood industry actors, because oftentimes they follow more than one sustainability certification. The intention is not that this is an either or. Either you follow the traceability protocol or you use a certification, but rather by increasing the traceability requirements in the certified supply chain, it actually increases assurance. The reality is traceability is not the end goal, but it is a foundation required to reach an end goal. So what I mean by that is you can have fully traceable seafood that comes from an area that was illegally harvested, right? It's still traceable, but it's not sustainable. So the point is that these sustainability certifications, they define what sustainability is in those supply chains, but they can all still leverage the same traceability requirements to reduce the overall burden of the industry actors that are actually following those certifications. I hope this answers your question.
Thank you. I'm going to move to another one. Much needed thought process, well defined. How are the operational challenges arising out of individual industry groups and regional governments' interest and influences will be handled effectively, will be a key success deciding factor. This has been one of the biggest challenges wherever we try to promote a monopoly standard or approach. Does any of you want to speak to that?
If I can jump in on this one.
Thank you, Christian.
Yep. part of the issue is that we're definitely not going to try for a monopoly approach, but a facilitatory approach that enables approaches around the world to be able to connect to each other. So, for example, we know that in different regional areas, whether it's the EU or in Bangladesh or in Japan, there might be DPP systems which are created. That is great, and that's definitely going to happen. What the UNTP is as a protocol is to allow those different systems as they develop to talk to each other and to talk a common language. So absolutely not trying to achieve the impossible, which would be one system that works for everything, but to facilitate different systems for different purposes created by different actors to be nevertheless able to deliver on what's necessary across global value chains. And then the second issue within that is how do you actually balance different interests? And there, what we have as the hook is that people do see already that there's a common interest in getting to a common solution, because the alternative is this hugely fractured market which increases costs and reduces performance.
Thank you, Christian. Another question, how to ensure that all companies from a similar sector integrate the same information in a DPP to support comparability of business and EU compliance?
If I could jump in on that one too, and I see some questions in the chat also talking about compatibility, technical compatibility between the EU DPP and other systems in the UNTP in particular. So the EU is leading the regulatory drive in this area, and that's having a profound impact on where people see requests. And the UNTP is responding to the need globally for interoperability that connects to the EU DPP. And so what we need to do to get alignment globally, and I'm saying this because I've spent the last 10 years working at G7 and G20 level on cooperation between different states, is we need to have the different states around the world getting an agreement about what common data needs to be shared in the format. And we can do that because everyone, again, is looking for this common position. And if the stakeholders are coming together in the way that they're currently doing and saying, hey, we've agreed between ourselves, this is what is really appropriate and it satisfies all your legislative needs, then there's a common answer which is already developed and it fits in for everybody's purposes. So that's the route that we're trying, because again, there is no alternative.
There is also a question which is related to manufacturers. Is there any upcoming pilot first implementation of the UNTP that will show us a practical example in the textile and leather industry soon? Our community of practice on traceability will be one of the pilot tester group on how to basically use this protocol and also how it will look in function and in operation. So it's going to happen most probably by the end of Q1 of this year. And since it's an open source platform on the web, everyone can actually see the updates and also who is participating in these working groups. And there is a supply chain working group, and you can see the updates after the bi-weekly meetings and sessions. So everyone can see the progress, and will be also read the first pilot's outcomes and experiences. I don't think we have more time for questions left. So I give back the floor to Matthias to wrap up and talk about the next steps.
Yes, thank you, Annette. It was said by Christian already, there are multiple ways to engage with us. The most simple way is to simply join our mailing list, which is also in the chat by now. You can then receive all types of information, updates about UNTP, can also engage yourself in discussions over the list. We have a monthly information meeting, which is targeted at a more general, non-technical audience, where we update the community about development progress on the UNTP, which takes always place on the last Thursday of a month, next one on 26th of February. And then I think for the group which is gathering here in this in the session, it's indeed most interesting probably to engage with Christian and the work he does as our chair of team of specialists on in the different working groups that he presented. That's the way where we actually accompany the development work of the UNTP with stakeholder convening that is necessary to move beyond just simply technical interoperability, but really convening the sector towards more alignment and harmonization and interoperability also at higher levels like common language being spoken, even more coherence on policy level. That is what we aim to achieve in these groups. So that's where you can reach out to Christian, and then he will inform you what the next steps will be. That leaves me with thanking every one of you. Excellent questions from your side, Annette. Perfect answers from all our speakers. And thanks to all of you listening and asking active questions in the chat in this webinar. Thank you for your interest, and we look forward to continue engaging with you.